Okay, I wanted to welcome everybody to, I think it's the third session of Environment Day. I wanted to welcome you to our session on disrupting the cycle at its roots, prevention in the management of natural resources. Um, so the rising demand for natural resources, exacerbated by the energy transition, leaves communities vulnerable to the impacts of corruption. Corruption facilitates environmental crimes and exacerbates the impact on people and the environment of resource extraction. In this session today, we're going to discuss the building blocks of an effective governance framework for preventing and mitigating corruption in the natural resource sector, while strengthening environmental protection and promoting climate action, especially at the community level. Our session is going to explore how integrity and traceability mechanisms, among other controls in licensing, ownership, contracts, state participation, and other things, paired with transparent, accountable use of national as well as subnational revenues, can guard against corruption and the environmental crime it enables. We've really sought at this session to provide real world examples of how this is being implemented on the ground and the results from that, and the relevance of the UN Convention Against Corruption and other global mechanisms and multi-stakeholder and non-governmental initiatives in addressing and tackling this issue. So we have a really great and diverse set of experts here from all over the world. It's regionally diverse. We've got representatives from NGOs, from governments, and from multi-stakeholder initiatives. So I think that that's really a great thing. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. From the right here, we have Rob Perry-Jones, who's head of Wildlife Environmental Crime Program at WWF International. We have Victor Pavlicnik. I'm sorry if I've not done your name justice, who's head of the National Agency for Corruption Prevention in Ukraine. We have Mr. Yasir Shakari, Director of Cooperation and Development for the National Authority for Probity Prevention and the Fight Against Corruption in Morocco. To my left, we have Jaime Ibarra, who is a board member and co-founder of Fundación Multitudes. And then we have Gay Alessandra V. Ordenes, who's technical director for the EITI Secretariat. And then we have last but not least, for sure, is Anik Dwinningram, who's the anti-corruption analyst at the Corruption Eradication Commission of Indonesia. Thank you very much. And I apologize. We had a little bit of last minute arranging all the speakers, and we do not have a name tag for you. And I apologize very much for that. So I just wanted to start basically with the format for this event. We are going to basically kind of divide up the session in two parts. The first panel is really going to focus on looking at the corruption risks, the challenges, what are emerging challenges that we face, to really look at how we could apply corruption prevention using the UNCAC and other mechanisms. So we thought we first part focused on the problems, emerging corruption challenges. And then the second part of the panel will focus on what are the solutions, what are the anti-corruption tools, approaches, multi-stakeholder approaches that we should apply, and how can we really apply the UNCAC. And we're going to focus in the second part to also ask the question of what can it be achieved at this Conference of States Parties, because as many of you know, we have a couple of resolutions that focus on the environment and climate. And we would like to see strong action, strong, meaningful resolutions with follow-up actions that are agreed to at this CoSP. So we will be raising those issues as well. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Karina Gilfillan. I'm Senior Analyst with the UNCAC Coalition, and I'm also today representing the UNCAC Coalition's Working Group on Environmental Crime and Corruption that is chaired by the Wildlife Justice Commission. So with that, let's just jump in because we have a lot of great speakers. And, oh, you know what? I did not introduce our online speakers, and maybe they will appear when when we have them speak, particularly on the first panel. But we have Fundación Cuidadino y Desarrollo. We have Mauricio Aracan Salvador, who's the executive director, and we have Olaraju Siraju, who's the chairman of the HIDA Resource Center. And they will appear in our first panel. So just jumping to the first part of the panel, we're really where I said we're looking at the problems, the impacts of those corruption risks, and the threats, including facing civil society and emerging issues. I wanted to start with Morocco's experience, and particularly looking at Morocco's experience related to the renewable energy sector and our efforts to promote climate action. What are the corruption risks in that sector? What has Morocco kind of been learning through their experience in promoting renewable energy?
Thank you very much, Corina, for giving me the floor. Hello, everybody. I want just to emphasize first that we are going to talk about the corruption in a specific sector, but from the other side, quite different from I think the others colleagues are going to talk about. The point that we want to emphasize is just to recall that the global economy is undergoing one of the biggest structural changes since the Industrial Revolution. Transition from energy production and consumption with high greenhouse gas emissions to energy systems with low or zero GHG emissions is a major component of global effort to mitigate climate change. To this end, most countries have committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, notably through their pledge to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. However, the transition to green or renewable energy, while promising a more sustainable and equitable future, faces numerous technical, social, economic, political, and geostrategic challenges that could slow down its effectiveness and pace of implementation. This commitment has sparked a wave of investment enthusiasm, reflected in the emergence of a diverse group of players seeking opportunities, including traditional players in the energy sector, but also financial investors, governments, as well as new energy developers, renewable energy producers, and energy-intensive consuming companies. And of the $3 trillion in global energy investment planned for 2024, $2 trillion are devoted to clean energy technologies and infrastructure, nearly twice the amount invested in fossil fuels for that year. Morocco has also seen a steady increase in electricity demand as a result of industrialization, general economic development, and rising living standards. Electricity consumption has increased by 44% over the last 10 years. This trend further increases its energy dependence due to the lack of significant fossil fuel reserves, with more than 90% of its energy needs being imported. Aware of these constraints, Morocco adopted an ambitious energy strategy aimed at increasing the share of renewable energies in the electricity generation mix to 52% in 2030 and attracting private investment. The sector's governance framework was also reformed with the creation of a regulatory authority. Specialized structures have been set up to support the development of renewable energy investments and the attractiveness of this sector. Finally, new legislative provisions have enabled the electricity market to be opened up to international investors. However, solar, wind, and hydroelectric projects require substantial investment, operate within complex regulatory frameworks, and involve long implementation cycles. These structural characteristics expose the sector to various integrity risks across the entire project lifecycle, from planning and financing to procurement, licensing, and regulatory compliance, including land use decisions and local community impacts, where governance failures can generate social tensions and undermine environmental objectives. In 2023, IMP PLC, which is the Moroccan anti-corruption agency that I represent, launched and co-led a joint exploratory initiative with the OECD and the Basel Institute on Governance. The initiative was not designed to establish a single collective action mechanism. Rather, it aimed to assess the feasibility, preconditions, and sectoral needs necessary to develop effective integrity-oriented collective action in the renewable energy field. Several areas of vulnerability were identified, notably high-value procurement process for infrastructure such as wind parks, solar power plants, and grid integration systems, access to subsidies, tax incentives, and preferential financing channels, complex authorization and permitting procedures, which could create opportunities for undue influence, and also the land use arrangements and community impact, where a lack of transparency could lead to reputational exposure. Collective actions are essential in contexts where integrity risks are systemic rather than isolated, where levels of trust among stakeholders are low or fragmented. Shared standards were required to ensure a level playing field and uneven maturity in compliance practices. Against this backdrop, the objective in Morocco was to mobilize public authorities, professional associations, academia, civil society, and subsequently the private sector in order to jointly identify corruption risks specific to renewable energy activities in the Moroccan and national context. Also, this emergence of sectoral standards and transparency mechanisms, which includes those contributing to environmental protection and responsible community engagement. The exploratory phase revealed a major insight. Unlike the financial sector, where previous initiatives successfully mobilized both public and private stakeholders around prevention mechanisms, the renewable energy sector demonstrated strong engagement from public authorities, of course from civil society, but limited participation from private operators, not as a form of resistance, but as an indicator of lower maturity in integrity culture and risk awareness. Before moving toward structured collective action, a capacity building phase was therefore necessary, including awareness raising, training, the creation of dialogue platforms, and the demonstration of tangible value for companies in terms of reputation, access to financing, and the sustainability of their social and environmental footprints. The experience demonstrated that collective action cannot be replicated identically from one sector to another, as sectoral cultures, incentives, market maturity, and regulatory complexity must be assessed, and capacity building work must precede operational commitments, rather than launching a formal collective action prematurely. We therefore prioritized knowledge sharing among stakeholders, open debate regarding existing risks, and the incremental involvement of private actors. This experience also highlighted that corruption prevention in the renewable energy sector is not solely a matter of economic efficiency, but a prerequisite for safeguarding environmental outcomes, protecting communities, and preserving the credibility of the national energy transition. This experience also will guide subsequent steps and inform the most appropriate pathways to foster integrity within Morocco's renewable energy sector. Therefore, some recommendations are being set up to optimize and complete the efforts made by our country in its quest for sustainable energy and in line with its international environmental and integrity commitments. For the legal and institutional framework component, we are working on enhancing transparency by increased access to information on investment opportunities and simplifying authorizations procedures. With regard to governance, coordination, and cooperation, annual surveys of investors are expected to identify their concerns and adapt policies accordingly. And we are currently working toward the adoption of ESG rules by regulated bodies, national companies, and potential investors by establishing a related bonus and incentive mechanism, and assessing the opportunity also of joining initiatives related to transparency and good governance like the EITI. And finally, ensuring board consultation with communities during the design phases of local projects, as well as awareness campaigns with the support of civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that your presentation really highlights a lot of the themes of this session. You know, given the significant amount of funds, you said I think 2 trillion for clean energy, we really do have to get it right. It's not just as far as how ensuring that the funds are managed and used to achieve their intended goals, but also you talk about the need to really engage different stakeholders in that process, or otherwise it's very difficult to make it a success. I also did want to flag that the president of the Anti-Corruption Authority of Morocco gave a statement yesterday in which he talked about the interlinkages, the need to look at the environment, the corruption linked to the environment, linked to climate action, linked to human rights as well. So we appreciate Morocco's leadership, particularly and also in global fora, to make those connections. And now with your ending, you ended about the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative, and that segues quite nicely, I think, to our next participant, a speaker who's online. Mauricio, are you online, and will you magically appear? Um, Mauricio was going to be speaking about the work in Latin America on natural resource issues, also particularly focused on the threats facing civil society. So yeah, Mauricio, can kind of give us the context of what are the corruption challenges, and also what are the risks for civil society actors that they're working to try to expose and help address this issue?
Good
Go ahead,
morning to
Mauricio.
everyone, and thanks, Corina, for having us together. Today, I will share with you the multiple and interconnected threats facing civil society across Latin America and why this matter deeply for our action on the promotion of transparency in the management of natural resources. First, it is important to understand the general state of civic space in Latin America today. Maybe some of you have seen the most recent data from the Civicus Monitor, showing that civic space in the world in general, but specifically in my region, is under significant pressure. Of 35 countries in the Americas, only a small number, just 10, are rated as having an open civic space. 9 are considered narrowed, 6 are considered obstructed, 7 are repressed, and 3 remain closed, formerly dictatorships. These restrictive environments are characterized by limitations of freedoms of association, peaceful assembly, and expression, and an increase in harassment and attacks against civil society actors. In practical terms, about 30% of people in Latin America live in countries where civic space is closed or repressed, significantly limited the ability of citizens to organize, to protest, to criticize authorities, or to engage meaningfully in public life. This deterioration of civic freedoms has been also accompanied by a worrying threat of new laws and policies explicitly aimed at restricting civil society activity. In El Salvador, for example, the Legislative Assembly passed more than a year ago what is called the Foreign Agents Law, that requires organizations, but also media, receiving international funding to register as foreign agents. This law grants broad powers to the government to control, sanction, and even prohibit organizations that they consider aligned with foreign interests. They must also pay a very high tax whenever they receive cooperation funds from abroad. Similarly, in Peru, the Congress approved a controversial amendment to the country's international cooperation law that expands the power of the national agency in ways that civil society argue restrict the independence of NGOs, particularly those working on human rights, defending indigenous peoples' rights, defending nature rights. Human rights defenders have gone as far as to describe this law as one of the most draconian restrictions of civil society in recent history. But there are also emerging threats in other countries, in Paraguay, in Venezuela. But I must talk also about my country, Ecuador, because why freedom of association and expression are protected in the Constitution, Civil society is now operating in a complex legal environment marred by executive regulation, legal ambiguity, and political pressure. So, in general, these conditions create practical barriers to the formation, operation, and sustainability of CSOs, and in some cases, have opened the door to the criminalization of human rights defenders and to threats to access to justice and information. At the same time as these legal and political restrictions escalate, we are also witnessing setbacks in fundamental democratic rights, including the right of access to information, a cornerstone of accountability in specifically these natural resource things we are discussing today. While many Latin American countries are part of the international agreement, the Escazú Agreement, which guarantees public access to environmental information and participation in environmental decision making, the implementation and enforcement of access to information laws remain uneven and under threat. Many countries have even registered backslidings in the existence of the national authorities in charge of guaranteeing the right of access to information. So, taken together, these conditions represent more than just isolated policy changes. They reflect a systematic contraction of civic space that directly affects the capacity of civil society to participate in transparency and accountability mechanisms and initiatives. The success of initiatives such as the ITI relies fundamentally on meaningful civic participation, the shared access to public information and data, and the robust debate among government, industry, and civil society stakeholders. When CSOs are criminalized, regulated out of existence, or intimidated into silence, their ability to analyze destructive sector data, advocate for reforms, or hold both governments and corporations accountable is severely compromised. But an specifically alarming dimension of the shrinking civic space in Latin America is related to the systematic persecution and killing of environmental land defenders, indigenous people activists. According to multiple international reports, Latin America remains the deadliest region in the world for defenders of nature, particularly those opposing extractive projects linked to mining, oil, gas, logging, and large scale infrastructure. Environmental defenders, often indigenous leaders, community organizers, or local activists, face threats, criminalization, forced displacement, and assassination for defending their territories and natural resources. These attacks are frequently carried out in context of impunity, weak rule of law, and collusion between political authorities, private interest, and organized crime, sending a chilling message that discourages civic participation and silences legitimate demands for transparency, consultation, and accountability. In this scenario, the promotion of transparency, democracy, and human rights is a high risk sport. If civil society voices are weakened, marginalized, or excluded, the process loses its credibility and its capacity to deliver substantive transparency and reform related to the management of natural resources. However, this is not a story of resignation, but of urgent action. Civil society across the region, and I must say across the world, continues to resist, adapt, and innovate in the face of repression, leveraging strategic litigation, regional solidarity, and international advocacy to push back against restrictions and defend civic space. For initiatives that are important for us, like the EITI, to remain meaningful, they must prioritize actions for civic space within their own frameworks, resist governmental pressures to limit participation, and affirm that effective transparency and accountability are inseparable from an empowerment from the independent civil society. Thank you very much, Corina, and I'll be waiting for questions if they are coming.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. Now, we've heard a lot about the challenges for civil society in Latin America. Now we're going to jump to our other online speaker, who's going to present the perspective of those working to expose environmental crime and corruption in Africa. And so I'd like to hand over to Alaraju Saraju, who's chairman of the HEDA Resource Center, HEDA Resource Center. There you are. Okay. Yep. So please.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Just following up on the last also presentation, I think this is more of the resonating factor that you get to experience in the global south, as you would want to put it, where the extractive sector, particularly around the issue of natural resources, is been associated more with consistent cases of not only environmental crimes, flagrant human rights abuses, and also economic deprivation at the level of the national resources, and at the same time at also individual level, such that extractive activities are carried out without the respect for extant laws. And this is not just been something of recent or just something that is just developing. It's been for decades of extractive activity, particularly where you've seen multinational corporations. And this is exactly where the concerns are more for the civil society, where we work with the communities that have actually been economically disempowered and also politically extinct from also engaging with the powers that be the regulators and also the authorities. The regulators also are empowered with the mandate. The same thing also with the government agencies, institutions, and arms of government representing the communities have consistently also aligned more with the authorities. And where they refuse to align, it's been consistent pressure from the home countries of many of these multinational corporations using diplomatic effort. And we've seen that where efforts were made at holding some of these companies to account, including even the revocation of some licenses granted for the operations, and the unfortunate situation where international officers of this company working with embassies, and that is one of the most shocking experience that we've seen to the extent that embassies assisting some of the oil corporations in abdicating the responsibilities for the cleanup. So there's been the consciousness and also collaboration between the local in some of the extractive sectors, communities where oil and gas are extracted, particularly now in the Niger Delta area of Nigeria, where civil society are actively working with international law firms, with international NGOs and local NGOs to not only investigate the cases, including the health impact on children and women, where it has been established that the level of pollution and also the toxicity in the water drank in this community 1,000 times higher than the UN permitted quantity of some of the toxins in the water. And this has already been presented to the international bodies like the UN working groups on business principle and human rights, and also special rapporteurs, to the extent that about 24 of them came together and condemned the operations of some of the oil multinationals in Nigeria, including accusing them of actually testing what is about going to the global village now, of what is disguised as divestment, which we always want to see how these companies divest from the fossil fuel to clean energy. But rather than actually working with to the faith and principle of divestment, this has actually been exploited by the multinational corporations to abandon their decades of pollution and liabilities to the community, leaving all those liabilities and employing the services of some hurriedly concocted, incapable companies to take over their operations and moving from onshore to the offshore. I mean, going to the offshore becomes even more difficult to monitor, and that actually spreads even faster. So now they're graduating from polluting the local environment to the international environment by going offshore without any sense of responsibility and accountability, without any record of ethical operation. And this has actually been challenging for many of the communities and also at the civil society organization. We've actually succeeded in collaborating with state institutions, particularly one of the states in Nigeria, which actually also conducted through a commission on environment and oil and came up with the liability amount conservatively based on some of the violation and pollution of the state by this multinational corporation of about $12 billion liability. Rather than also some of these companies responding to this is not from civil society now. This is actually by one of the states, which is a subnational state in the country. And this is the level at which civil society organizations need to also continue to work as much as possible. They're available through available mechanisms, engaging with subnationals who also have certain level of mandate and power under the law to hold the extractive industry accountable and responsible beyond what you have at the national level. Interestingly, also, as part of the mandate, is how we also engage with the NEITI in Nigeria. And this was almost one of the first, historically, from our understanding and also engagement, that you're having the EITI chapter also directly getting involved with the divestment process, to the extent that we now have the framework that has been developed, by NEITI to also establish and engage with the process without necessarily waiting for the conduct. And we don't want that also actually really happening, where all that we would get from the EITI mandate and principles would be about investigating what has actually been done. And for us, it is about also being proactive to the extent that the NEITI and other chapters in countries with the creation of the EITI chapters to be part of the process of also setting the standard and not waiting for the deeds to be done, only then to go on appeal for what is actually supposed to have been the basic fundamental principle to guide the operations. The level of the collaboration between the national NGOs and international NGOs with Nigeria, I can say, has actually also provided a very potent weapon to which, beyond just working in the countries, the victim countries, and then also with the people, is also to start working with the law enforcement agencies to investigate the level of also corruption. We've established the fact that the operation and licensing process in many of the oil-producing states is not always just about the corruption of the officials in these countries. It's also about the inducement and deliberately corrupting activities and tendencies of the oil corporations in terms of how their licenses are awarded, in terms of how they also abdicate the primary responsibilities and deliberately use not only just the law in those countries. It is about also influencing the process through which the laws are passed to the detriment of the fundamental rights of the people. And this was seen with the experience with gas flaring, with the experience of the oil pipeline vandalization, and the attempt even to the extent that some of the oil companies, through their officials, gets to influence vandals to go and vandalize, the pipelines. And why the deliberate attempt has been perpetuated to the extent that pipelines outlive their shelf life with not less than 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So naturally, at this stage, the pipelines are easy to, even without any attack, rupture easily, pouring several quantities of oil into the communities, into the waters, where the livelihood of the people are genuinely just based on the environment. This is not where you have industrialized areas. These are areas where people actually also survive on subsistent farming in terms of both fishing and crop, farming. And the progress being made with engagement with NEITI, and also some of the regulatory agencies who are deliberately also incapacitated, unfortunately, by the states without resources sufficient for them to carry out their mandate, and having to rely on sometimes even the oil multinational corporations, which they are expected to regulate over or supervise or even sanction, actually responsible for funding their activities. It's obvious that there's some clear deliberate action on the part of both the states and these operators to make sure that regulation and also law enforcement is not effective. We've also started
Lanre,
working.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we really have a lot of speakers here, so we're going to have to move on. If you can wrap up in one sentence,
Yes.
we'll need to wrap up. Yeah, we have a lot of
Thank you so much, Corina.
Sorry.
And just lastly, we've just also forged that with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, using the environmental crimes and also corruption principle, to which Karina mentioned earlier, as a working group, also under the UNCAC, to see how this is also brought within corruption level and also environmental crime. I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to go right to our last speaker. I think that we've heard quite a bit about civil society participation, how communities are impacted. But now we're going to be going to another part of the world in Ukraine to hear about the corruption risks, kind of what they're doing to assess the corruption risks in the environmental sector. Yeah, that's going to kind of inform what kind of prevention measures we need. So, Victor, you should just feel free to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Talking about environmental issues in Ukraine, we can talk a long time, but I maybe try to focus on some practical issues and on some results that we have in cooperation with Basel Institute, also WWF work, and we already conducted a huge and really effective risk assessment, strategic analysis of Russian risk in forestry sphere, and I'll try to focus on exact examples because for us, for Ukraine, forestry is one of vital spheres in Ukraine, because up to 16% of territory are covered by forests in Ukraine. And why it's more vital, because we do understand that the war we have in Ukraine now causes severe physical and socio-economical damages to this sphere. And just for understanding total losses in the forestry sector, including banned areas, air pollution, and protected natural territories damaged as a result of the breach of the Kakhovka hydropower plant dam, are estimated at 28 billion US dollars. It's huge damages for Ukraine. That's why we do understand the real role of prevention of any corruption risk in this sphere and the possibility to renovate the sphere future. For us, if we're talking about cooperation with our partners, we've signed MOUs with Basel Institute of Governance, with WWF, and conducted this risk assessments that give us a result of finding the main problems, main risk in different spheres. I can briefly highlight them because my main focus of this is, of course, imperfect legislation in forestry, also paper-based document flow and insufficient digitalization, because digitalization now in our times during the war, it's vital issue for giving possibility to even to get administrative services online. And also one of additional risk is the lack of proper external oversight and inspections, because also due to the full-scale invasion, there was no any possibility to conduct such inspections since year 2022. They should be renovated. And of course, we have occupied territories which can be also covered by our attention. If we're talking about exact tools, on behalf of National Agency on Corruption Prevention, we have several options, several functions to find corruption risk and to focus on them. First of all, I already mentioned about corruption risk assessment, strategic analysis of corruption risk, where we are directly focusing using possibility of expert help of our partners, our donors, also with cooperation with civil society and experts from there to conduct this risk assessment, to focus, to find those problems and to recommend real practical issues to minimize corruption risk in these spheres. Another issue is, of course, our function to conduct anti-corruption expertise of draft of acts of cabinet of ministers and laws that are adopted by parliament, because they give us the possibility to identify risk for committing offenses in future and to eliminate or minimize them for future proper work in this sphere. And also I will focus on one vital function of national agencies, of course, forming anti-corruption policy strategically. Now we are drafting a new anti-corruption strategy for years 2026, 2030. Previous strategy was highly recognized by international monitors. For example, during our fifth evaluation round of Istanbul anti-corruption action plan conducted by OECD, we have got a result of more than 90 grades on forming anti-corruption policy. And we do believe that next strategy, which was based on this assessment, will be even better and focusing on conducting huge researches on different spheres of life which are most corruption vulnerable in Ukraine. For example, the same we are focusing on the research on subsoil sector and land sector in Ukraine. We do believe in getting proper results. We also use experience of experts outside public service, experts from civil society and related partners, international partners, to detect hugest problems that can be solved in the period of next 5 years. And so I briefly try to highlight the main purpose and the main problems that we have and focusing. I already had possibility to declare during my statement today morning that we are trying to fight corruption, because perception of corruption in Ukraine is really high and people perceive corruption like a second problem in Ukraine after the war. We do understand that these problems of war and corruption we should face directly in Ukraine and to try to prevent them, those tools that we can provide by NACP and the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would just like to open it up for questions because I think what we're going to do is we have our speakers now that have really focused on the emerging corruption risks, emerging challenges, And I think we've heard from both civil society and governments about those corruption risks, as well as about the challenges for trying to work with different stakeholders to solve the issues. So I think I'm just going to go to the floor to see if anyone has any questions for any of our speakers, both online or in the room. Any questions or no? Oh, yes, go ahead. And just please identify yourself and try to keep it brief because we do have a second part. So if you can be concise. Can you speak up louder? Yeah. Oh, do we have a mic? Even better.
I'm from Azerbaijan, and I have a question to Viktor Pavlyushuk. Did you have any research on the possibilities of which UNCAC as a convention gives in terms of extra territorial rights to claim compensation for the crimes affected environment by Russia? Thank you.
I think that it's a little bit broader issues than only UNCAC convention, because we should understand the role of International Criminal Court and the position of Ukraine on this issue. Of course, the source damage that was caused by full-scale invasion is one of the issues that is always day-to-day counted to have possibility to renovate and to in future to get the resources for innovation Ukraine, for rebuilding Ukraine overall, not only if we are talking about environment, but one of the main. I've already mentioned about such severe catastrophe like breach of dam in Kakhovka, which caused real consequences to all environment. I mentioned only forestry, but we should understand that it's hundreds of billions of damages for that. That's why if we're talking about UNCAC, it's maybe really small part of this issue, and it's more maybe really connected to international courts and our suits that we already have in this court.
Thank you very much. And I think for just more broadly, obviously, very, very many challenges beyond UNCAC in the Ukraine. But I think for the UNCAC coalition, we have a working group on focus on the victims of corruption, which really focuses on trying to provide reparations or compensation for those victims of corruption. And so I think your question is a really important one. And in fact, we would like to see any resolution coming out of the environmental crime and corruption resolution that's currently being negotiated. We would really like to see a recognition of the victims of corruption, really linking that to human rights abuses as well. So that's something I think it's a really important issue that we would like to see recognized here in UNCAC as well. And it's in the convention, but further building upon that. So now I'm going to jump because we have great speakers and we want everyone to have enough time. So I'm going to jump to part 2, and then we will have a Q&A. We will have a Q&A. I want to remind the speakers to please try and keep it really now to 6 minutes if you can. There's a high-level segment following this, right? So we're going to need to wrap up. But I encourage you to stay for the high-level section, but we're going to need to wrap up this session. So as I said earlier, the second part of this session is really going to look on highlighting effective responses, tools, interventions, really looking at how we can use the UNCAC and other mechanisms to really try and address these issues. And also, if we can, speak to what we'd like to see happen here at CoSP. So I wanted to basically, I'm going to start in this part with I'm going to go to in the second part. I'm going to start with our colleague from Indonesia to basically speak to what Indonesia is doing as far as coming up with solutions to these corruption risks. Yes, giving us your perspective and experiences. Please go ahead.
Okay, can I show up my presentation in the laptop?
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a presentation that's
Yeah.
supposed to go up.
I just put the presentation in the laptop so can show up. Sorry. Just to get a better visual about my explanation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Corina. Good afternoon, distinguished participants and moderator and my fellow panelists. My name is Ani. Today, I will briefly share about KPK's experience in tackling corruption in Indonesia's natural resource using an integrated approach that actually reflects our mandated in duties and function. Oh. Oh. Oh, sorry. What happened? Okay. So as you may know that Indonesia is a resource-rich country and we are a global leader in some part of commodities such as nickel and then coal, palm oil, fisheries, forest, biodiversity, and marine ecosystem. These resources, of course, are central to our economic and then food security and energy transition in the future. However, this high value also created a serious governance and also corruption risks, especially in licensing and then land use, and then about the revenue collection. So we to address this wicked problem, we and KPK using an integrated approach with four pillars, which is prevention and monitoring, and then coordination, national anti-corruption strategies, and the last one is prosecution as the last resort. This approach actually designed for fix the ecosystem, the government administrative system first, and then use the only criminal offense when it is necessary. So let me explain about our approach one by one. First, take a look to the prevention and also monitoring. Actually, this is our mandate to do like conduct a review on all of the government's institution and also government agency to review about all the governance that they have and then provide actionable recommendation that should be followed up by agreed action plans with clear timelines, and also they must be report to us in particular times, and we have to assessing and also review it in the particular of time also, and then give them about which is can be closed or still be open. So basically this is, oh sorry. So basically from 2008, KPK has conducted 67 review on governance natural resource management, and then producing, I think it's a thousand of finding that can be generalized to 6 structural problems, which is first one is about unclear legal forest area, and there is no single map to land use, so it create discretion and also overlap licensings, as well as land conflicts across the natural resource, also including with indigenous management. And then the second one is about weak licensing systems. Licensing system were manual, opaque, and also costly. So it creates space for bribery, gratuity, and also extortion that makes a lot of business entities choose to operate illegally. And then the third one is the permit holders compliant with administrative, financial, and also the environment obligation was very low. We also found that weak data integrity from upstream to downstream, and then it makes underreporting and also smuggling for certain commodities. And then we found also that opaque ownership structures and mistargeted energy subsidies that contribute to late to commercial user and fiscal waste. So based on this finding, KPK formulated clear governance recommendations by accelerating the legal designation of forest area to prevent illegal exploitation, and then strengthen the one map policy as a single national reference, build integrated digital and traceable licensing and compliance system from upstream to downstream to save our state revenue, and then use the national identification number or NIN to improve the targeting and efficiency of energy subsidies. And the last one is enhancing the beneficial ownership transparency to prevent proxies and sell companies. However, this system reform required strong political commitment and cross-sectoral coordination, of course. But in Indonesia, institutional silos often slowed the progress. So to address this, KPK using the second approach by coordinate to take a lead as a national coordinations through the national movement to safeguard Indonesia's natural resource in 2015. This is a movement also supported by our president, and then this was helped us much about accelerating the reform and safeguarding the platform of anti-corruption and also increase state revenue. However, in 2018, this movement must be concluded because at the time our government decided to adopt about the national strategy for corruption prevention as mandated by ANKEC. So KPK was tasked with other 5 ministries to coordinating national anti-corruption action and monitoring the implementation. Oh, okay. To prevent the corruption in many sectors, including in the natural resources. So since the inception, the national strategy also integrated our recommendation in natural sector. So it make our recommendation be followed until right now. And then this is the results of our intervention from 2008 until 2025. Regarding the one map policy, we risk increasing in the forest area determined, and then the beneficial ownership disclosure also increased. And also we saving a lot from the targeted energy subsidies because we prevent the duplication and fraud using the national identification number. And then in terms of licensing, we also have a lot of progress regarding what we have done to prevent the corruption, also increasing the sets revenues using the digital and also integrated licensing system across the ministries. And this is the last of our approach. This is the prosecution. So since 2004, KPK has prosecuted 20 cases related with natural resources with 60 defendants, including the government officials, member of parliament, and also the private sector actor. And this is the lesson learned from our approach and also the key challenge. The first one is prevention must be system-based, not project-based. And then data integration is the strongest anti-corruption tool, of course. And then political commitment determines reform durability. This is the most challenge that we face in Indonesia right now. And then the key challenge that we face also is about institutional resistance, especially from the ministry that have benefited from the silos and also from the manual licensing system. And then pressure from the vested interest, also a capacity gap at the subnational levels. And okay, this is the last one. Okay, based on this lesson, KPK see several ways to going forward. The first, we want to strengthen the institutional safeguard to protect the reforms. And the second one is expanding digital government to remaining high-risk sectors. And the third one is enhancing beneficial ownership verification, not only disclosure. And then linking social and environmental damage recovery to and corruption sentencing. This is one we advocated to our colleagues and the repression working unit. And also the last one is strengthening international cooperation on AML, anti-money laundering, and then illicit financial flows and asset recovery. So to conclude that, we believe that corruption in natural resource is not inevitable if a system are built to prevent it. Thank you, ourselves from KPK. Hopefully you can make a lesson learned from our experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that is a great slide actually to keep up. I would say that I think that Indonesia's experience, many of those things that you're doing on beneficial ownership, transparency, verification, also your data on enforcement, providing data on actually the results of enforcement, some of those other issues, it would be great for us to see very concrete anti-corruption prevention tools in this resolution that's now being negotiated. So I think you really spelled out like how concretely the UNCAC can be used, through beneficial ownership, transparency, and verification and other measures. So it's very concrete. So thank you very much. And that segues really well to Gay's presentation on EITI, which works on a lot of promoting beneficial ownership and other anti-corruption tools. So I'm going to hand it over to really talk about more across the globe how you're promoting that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corina, and very happy to be here. So the EITA has been mentioned many times during this session, so probably I'll just say something about it for those who are not familiar. So the EITI is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. It is a global standard for the management of natural resources, specifically in the oil, gas, and mining sector. And it's currently being implemented by 56 countries globally, including the most resource-rich countries in the world, such as Indonesia, Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mongolia, Argentina, and Chile just joined EITI, to name a few. So in my presentation today, I just want to emphasize some of the things that have already been mentioned, and really stress the importance of transparency in combating corruption and environmental crimes. I'm also going to provide the hook to what are currently being discussed in the draft resolution on environmental crimes and why transparency is very important to be reflected in the current draft resolution. So in terms of effective responses that we have seen so far in fighting corruption, and we have the EITA has been implemented, as I've said, by 55 countries, some of them for over 20 years already. So there is really evidence to this when we say that public access to information and transparent and accountable governance really make a difference in making sure that corruption and crimes in the environment sector does not happen. So let me cite a few examples. One, transparent licensing procedures. So this is key, and this was mentioned by my colleague from KPK in Indonesia as well. We very much welcome that in the draft resolution, there are references to transparent licensing and contracting procedures, as well as transparent beneficial ownership information. But we want to take that a step further. What we want to propose is a stronger language regarding beneficial ownership declarations that also require politically exposed persons to declare if they have interests in mining oil and gas projects. This is very important. We have evidence of at least 2 countries that have done a cross comparison of beneficial ownership data with asset declarations of politically exposed persons and have been able to identify over 100 red flags or potential cases of conflicts of interest. So making that hook between BO data and politically exposed persons declaration of assets is, I think, a strong language that could be reflected in the current draft resolution. Another one, transparency of state-owned enterprises. Clear now, there's no reference on SOE transparency in the draft resolution. We consider this a huge gap. Why? Over the 1/3 of the 1.3 trillion US dollar revenues that have been reported coming from the extractive sector are revenues that come from state-owned enterprises, 1/3 of 1.3 trillion. So it's really difficult to discuss corruption in the natural resource sector without involving state-owned enterprises. There's a report by the OECD on foreign bribery that says that SOE officials are among the highest risk or prone to the most corrupt practices. So for us, that's a clear indication, that's a clear evidence that when you're talking about addressing corruption in the extractive sector, you have to necessarily involve state-owned enterprises. We have evidence again of many countries in the EITI community where state-owned enterprises have been known for having opaque revenue flows. And in fact, there is one country, I will not name it, but they did an actual analysis of whether the revenue flows that are whether the revenues that are received by SOEs actually flow to the national treasury, and they found out that it does not. So the revenues do not reach the national treasury. Again, very high corruption risks involving SOEs. They should be referenced in the draft resolution. Next, the use of technology and open data. We welcome the reference in the draft resolution on the use of technology to detect corrupt practices. And I think this is a huge step. But what we are missing is the reference to the importance of open and interoperable data. Our colleague from KPK said it very nicely in one of her slides where she said data integration is the strongest anti-corruption tool. We feel that if we are not going to reference open and interoperable data in this resolution, it will severely limit the impact and the potential of technology to make a difference in detecting corruption risks. Again, another example of use of open data, one EITA country in Africa compared their export data, which is in open format, with the import data in the Comtrade UN database, and found out that over $4 billion are the subject of illicit financial flows just by trading five minerals, gold being one of them. So that's a concrete example of how comparing data sets, if they are interoperable, could easily detect corruption. Lastly, multi-stakeholder oversight. Also not referenced in the current draft resolution. There is a reference to protecting civic space, which again is welcome. But in addition to that, I think there should be a stronger reference to all the parties, governments, companies, and civil society working together to have a good understanding of what are the corrupt practices that are emerging in a country and what are the effective tools. 40% of transition minerals or critical minerals are in countries that have weak rules of law or jurisdictions with weak governance. So if we're not going to protect civic space, it will be hard to even talk about fighting corruption if there's no genuine civic space in those countries where these minerals are being produced. And lastly, the importance of effective follow-up mechanisms. I think this cannot be overemphasized. We can draft a very good resolution, but if we don't have concrete follow-up mechanisms to make sure that these commitments are being implemented with the help of international organizations such as the EITI, then I think we can only go so far. I'll stop here, Karina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gay. And that was very concrete as far as laying out what well, what are the effective anti-corruption tools, as well as multi-stakeholder engagement, but also what really should come out here in Doha. You mentioned you ended with multi-stakeholder group participation as well, or that's one of your themes, and I'd like to now go to you, Jaime, about to talk about your experiences, your organization's experiences, and solutions, or how should states really work to promote civil society participation and multi-stakeholder approaches?
Well, Corina, thank you very much. My name is Jaime Ibarra. I'm the co-founder of Fundación Multitudes. I'm working in this for 12 years. And 10 years ago, transparency in the Chile extractive industry had no meaning at all. I was in Lima in my first ATA Global Summit, like I told you yesterday. I didn't know much about transparency. And I went with a government representative, and he told me, Jaime, this thing is for underdeveloped countries. And he thought, well, Chile was too cool for school. We didn't think that. And we started with Multitudes advocacy campaign, along with other organizations, to push Chile to join the standard. Spoiler alert, we just joined to the to the ATI, but we have a lot of work to do. We recently have elections this Sunday, so we don't know what is going to happen now. Chile is one of the largest countries in the world in mining. In 2022, 13% of the GDP come from mining, and 58% of the export from mining. And Chile extracts 23% of the copper around the world. So we haven't adopted a standard yet. Community asks questions. What is it being extracted? How decisions are made? Who benefits and who pay the cost for this? The system has low transparency and limited participation in Chile. And pretty much the community gets the money for the companies, so don't they bother. That creates a suspicious space, inequality, and sometimes corruption. ATI is essential for Chile. Fundación Multitudes is working on a citizen participation mining and help to create the basis for formal oversight. Even before the government formed the multi-stakeholder group, Chile, we organized the Mesa Ampliada de la Sociedad Civil to AT Chile to monitor in progress and push AATI in the OGP plans. This shows that when civil society is strong, organized, protected, and have some money to work, transparency can move forward. After a decade of advocacy, the government of Chile appointed COCHILCO, who leads the process to join ATI, and Chile will become the 53rd country to implement the standard. But ATI is a transparency initiative, and no environmental initiative or climate initiative. The transparency goes to the process for the community, who pay the taxes, how the damage is going to be repaired. So that's why I decided to also work in Escazú agreement. We did a shadow report with the Escazú agreement. We also pushed it for environment and transparency and protected to defenders. And our work in Principle 10 and the participation in Escazú negotiation helped to formalize 3 core rights: access to information, public participation, and access to justice. We work locally to strengthen municipality environment management to get certification on environment and compliance to the closest level to our communities. Escazú reduced corruption risk by improving traceability and transparency in the environment decision making. But that makes you some new problems. Now we face the digital violence and disinformation, and those tools are those tools silence and intimidate defenders, especially women's, indigenous peoples, and other marginalized groups. Escazú and ATI still lack a specific digital protection measures. That's why we have some reports. We make a couple of studies. You can download them from www.fundacionmultitudes.org if you want to see it. One of them is online gender-based violence against women environment defenders. And the other one is no digital justice, no climate justice. And all these studies were held in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And some numbers say that 83% of women environmental defenders report online violence for their activism, and 47% of them reduce their online presence, or stop working on some topic because of fear. Attacks include, but not limited to, threat of sexual violence, smear, campaign, and tactics to use awakened leadership. And in 2025, we published a paper showing that disinformation is a central obstacle to environment governance. And we also found that none of the countries in the studies have a national protocols to protect defenders from digital violence. So, based on our research, our recommendation for the UNCAC Global Civil Society Coalition and our shadow report in 2023 gave 15 priority recommendations to strengthen anti-corruption system. And we have proposed 4 critical steps. The first one is reinforce political participation and civic oversight, expand civic space and anti-corruption work. The second is protect environmental defenders, including digital safety, creating a national protection protocols that include harassment and disinformation. The third one is strengthening information integrity and platform for accountability. That requires algorithm transparency, climate contest, and fast remove sponsored disinformation. And the fourth one is integrate gender, intersectional, and human rights frameworks. So that's a lot of work we have to do, but if we keep doing this work, the next 10 years, I will tell you a different story. A story where a region where extractive projects operate within the world-class transparency, defenders are protected offline and online, communities trust the information they receive, and decisions are made openly and fair. And I will be like Finland told me once, transparency and corruption is not an issue for us anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And I think that on the issue of civil society protection, I think that's another thing that's very important that we would like to see recognized and acted upon in the resolution, as far as not just really more fulfilling, fully implementing Article 13 of the UNCAC to ensure there is this safe and enabling environment for civil society actors, and recognizing the different civil society actors, and then, developing protection mechanisms for those as well that are coming under attack. So much more kind of active support and protection for the actors coming under attack, including environmental defenders. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rob from WWF, who's going to be talking about, I think, some links between corruption, environmental crimes, conflict, and as well as looking at, the impacts of that and some solutions, including on corruption prevention, but also on human rights-based approaches. So Rob, I hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Karina. And thank you and well done all for staying so far. I should also thank Sweden, who enabled me to come to attend this Under the Voices for Diversity program. Let me jump straight in. My presentation will go into 3 parts. The first part is about some of the key themes and unifying elements. The second part is about a human rights-based approach to addressing illegal natural resource extraction, corruption, organized crime, and social harms. And the third part is a short look at the environmental crimes financial toolkit, which is a collaboration with the financial sector. I've put this here, and I can hand out some QR codes, which it's an online tool. It's better with a presentation, but in the interest of time, I'll talk you through it quickly. So if you look at the first part on key themes, corruption and crimes that affect the environment do not exist in a vacuum. My first point is that they live within self-reinforcing ecosystems. Crimes that affect the environment are linked to corruption and to human rights abuses, and often they are linked to conflict. As part of a self-reinforcing ecosystem, trying to address one, for example, corruption, without looking at its relationship with another, for example, human rights, it brings challenges. The second point I want to make in this first part is that crimes that affect the environment have multiple impacts. Often they are viewed through an environmental lens, which is kind of obvious, perhaps, given their name. but in fact, their impacts depend on your starting point. So to some, the central issue is environment. To others, it is climate. Others still, it's human rights or corruption and so forth. In fact, crimes that affect the environment are all of the above. They threaten environmental security, for example, deforestation and flooding, illegal mining and pollution of water. They threaten human security, as of the above, livelihoods, creating social tensions, environmental and human rights defenders, as we've heard, particularly the gender dimensions there. And they threaten state security in terms of transnational organized crime and corruption, breakdown in the rule of law and the erosion of trust and faith in state authority. The impacts and their intersections are unifying themes, and I hope evident in the following examples that I'll do. I'll show. In full transparency, I should note that neither of the examples I'm going to look at are anti-corruption approaches in the narrow sense. Each recognize, I think, that corruption is embedded within wider political, social, environmental, and economic dynamics. The hope is to reduce the space in which corrupt practices can operate. I think I'm going to give a nod to Gay here and her emphasis on the need for transparency and how it creates accountability, because I think in the first example I'm going to give, that's really what is first and foremost. And the first example I want to look at is what I think is a very progressive national strategy and action plan for addressing illegality in the harvest and trade in abalone. First of all, what is abalone? It's also known as perlman. It's a snail. It's a marine snail. It's extremely valuable. It is both witness to and protagonist in a tale of historical exclusion, colonialism, human rights abuses, transnational organized crime, and corruption. Illegal exports are worth around $60 million a year. Many local fishers have been pushed into poaching due to poverty, slow reform and corruption in the fisheries sector, and limited livelihood options. Transnational criminal syndicates have exploited vulnerable fishers. They've created dependencies through payments in drugs. Enforcement has been strong. There's also been the setting of quotas, investment in aquaculture, but illegality has persisted at very high levels. And the exclusion of local fishers from decision-making, the lack of access to harvest and to resource rights, the lack of alternative livelihood options has fueled illegal activity. Put another way, it also means that the strong enforcement has risked criminalizing poverty. In 2023, there was a shift towards and a pivot towards a more socially oriented response. There was a multi-stakeholder workshop convened at recognizing that people had to be part of the solution. And the resulting abalone strategy and action plan in 2025, I would say, is a milestone achievement. It embeds a human rights-based approach aligned with the planet principles that help identify HRBA, which is P for participation, L for legality, A for accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, and transparency. Key features of this plan include socioeconomic impact assessments to guide the fair reallocation of resource rights, gender-inclusive consultations, community involvement in stock assessments, so the biomonitoring of the resource, equitable and timely allocation of resource rights, including to informal fishers from the and a shift in enforcement from lower level actors to higher level actors through financial crime investigations. In summary, on this part, I would say the Abalone Action Plan is a visionary, rights-based and socially inclusive model, and it creates pathways for transparency and accountability, potentially pushing corruption to the margins. The strategy's emphasis on financial crime also helps, is a neat segue to the next example I want to draw attention to. As I said, there's a QR code for this. It's an online digital tool. Environmental crimes generate around, let's say, 280 billion annually. Yet they remain deprioritized within the financial risk frameworks. Less than 1% of suspicious transaction reports globally relate to environmental crime. And financial institutions are both at the center of risk exposure and disruption. They're exposed to risk because they're directly linked to environmental harm and environmentally and crime-related financial flows through the provision of capital and other client services to high-risk commodities and high-risk sectors. And they're central to disruption because criminals use the global financial system to transfer, to conceal, and to launder illicit proceeds. So the toolkit is a collaboration between WWF and the private sector. It's an open access digital platform supporting monitoring and decision-making. Its development was supported by the Financial Services Task Force of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which includes many of the major international banks. It's not a anti-corruption tool in the narrow sense. It's created with the financial institutions to reduce downstream risks associated with environmental crime, corruption, and human rights. But it embeds environmental crime considerations directly into financial sector risk and compliance frameworks. So it's both an awareness-raising tool and it's a practical manual to help institutions identify, assess, and prevent risk. Within the tool, there are case studies and there are mechanisms for understanding and addressing risk. To wrap up, I would say that crimes that affect the environment are not solely environmental in nature. They are inextricably linked to corruption, to human rights abuses, to political finance, and to the global financial system and to climate impacts. They constitute security threats, encompassing human security, environmental security, and state security. And addressing crimes that affect the environment requires a whole-of-government approach, a systems-based approach, recognizing these interconnections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I think that many of the points, again, I think that we would just as we're nearing the end here, well, we will take questions and answers, but just the tackling, financial crimes, enforcement measures, I think some of those also the links between how these environmental crimes and corruption impact security. Tackling that. We want all of this again recognized in the resolution today that's being negotiated. And one other thing, just to add on, I think from civil society's perspective is the follow-up measures. And I think that Rob has identified a toolkit, that could be used on the financial tracking side to aid in that. But I think that one of the things that we really want to see in this resolution is of very concrete follow-up measures, particularly to make linkages with other agreements, like, for example, organized crime, which we haven't touched upon as much here, but the role of organized crime in environmental crimes, the UN Convention to tackle a transnational organized crime. There should be synergies between the two conventions, but with other mechanisms as well as with non-governmental organizations. So we would really like a concrete follow-up measure in the resolution that would promote those cooperation between the UNCAC and those other mechanisms. And another thing that I think is as we're watching the negotiations and we have seen the public draft, as Gay was referencing, I think we're very concerned that climate in the environmental crime and corruption resolution does not appear. And it seems really kind of quite absurd to have a resolution on this topic in this day and age, given all of the impacts that we're facing of climate change, and also the vast sums of money that are going into climate protection. That's not being mentioned in the resolution. So that from our civil society, from the UNCAC Coalition, our working group, that's a real significant concern for us for how credible this resolution is in really addressing the threats that we all face. And these anti-corruption tools should be applied on all of climate to achieve climate protection, environmental protection goals, and that really should be reflected in the resolutions. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. I wanted to open it up. I realize it's been it's a long panel, but I did want to open up for anyone who has any questions to our panelists here. If there are any questions or comments or views that anyone would like to express at this point. Any questions? No? Okay, well, I mean, I think I would just, given that we're at the end here, but we have some time, I would ask our panelists if you did want to do a very short wrap up, also based on what you've heard from other panelists, that we could do that, and then I think that we'll be closing. So Rob, that you can go first on this. Did you want to just do a couple minutes of wrapping up based on everything that we've heard and what we're trying to achieve at the CoSP today? Just your reflections.
I feel on the spot, but I'll try to wrap up and add a little bit more. I think sometimes that the task that we face is immense, but I think often the solutions are local, and it's important that we focus on some of the local solutions, bearing in mind the bigger context, and that the resolutions that we hope to see coming out of this provide a platform for larger scale and broader recommendations but that need to be taken down to a local level. Remembering that at the end of this is people that are affected, and that is people form the starting point for how that response is crafted. Thank you.
Well, I think we need to improve the civil space participation. I think it's something that's really urgent. We need to be careful about the digital violence, like I told you before. The misinformation is a really, really high risk for the environmental issues, climate issues. Especially, we need to put a lot of attention on artificial intelligence. I think that we can be something we can work on it. Thank you.
Yes, I think if there are government delegates in the room who will be part of the negotiations for the resolution on environmental crimes, it would be really useful if you could, champion some of the points that we have made here today, specifically on transparency and access to information. This is a norm for 55 countries that have been implementing the EITI standard for over 20 years. The sky has not fallen down because these 55 countries are being transparent. So we hope that could, provide convincing evidence. If there's strong pushback to, what might be the result if countries are more transparent about data and information on licensing and beneficial ownership, I think we have a good number of countries that have been transparent with respect to this matters, and we have seen the benefits rather than the harm that transparency has brought to this country. So hopefully you could champion that in this negotiation.
Okay, I would like to say that corruption in natural resources is not only about illegal money. It is about environmental destruction, inequality, and lost opportunities for the future generation. So we are in KPK hopefully that there is an integrated approach and also strong cooperation, international cooperation. So we are waiting for the resolution and ready to support it and implement it in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists, and also online. Are our panelists online? I'm not sure if they were able to stay through the end, but if they wanted to make.
I'm here. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. Just briefly. Yep.
Thank you. I think it is important that we continue to forge this collaboration, just like it said, particularly with the EITI. There's a whole lot of role that the EITI will have to play in coordinating the engagement between states the private sector and also the civil society, and ultimately is to also disaggregate the impact of corruption in the extractive sector on the vulnerable groups, the young people and also the women. These are very important. Children, women, and the young people. We've seen the experiences of deformity and the rest of that, with these groups in Nigeria. And the last thing would be for me also to also strengthen how host countries of multilateral corporations and oil extractive industries are used to hold them accountable when infractions are committed in countries where they carry out their operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's quite early your time there, Lanre. So thank you very much for participating. And I think that I'm going to close it. Thank you very much to all of you for participating. And feel free to come up and ask individual questions to our panelists as well. Thank you very much.